Hello, folks. My name is Glenn Crytzer. I'm hosting this hour of Loungin' with Lombardi. I'm guest hosting here for John, who has skipped off to go see a live show today, but I'm sure glad to be with you. The tune we just heard was called A Good Night for Murder from the George Barnes Octet. Barnes was a virtuoso guitarist in the 1930s, 40s, and beyond. He was the first, actually, to record an electric guitar solo on March 2nd, 1937, when he was just 17, and quickly became a sought-after studio musician here in New York City. Was hired as the staff guitarist with the NBC Orchestra. After Barnes was drafted in 42, he served for 4 years, came out in 46, and formed the George Barnes Octet, which we just heard. They had a 15-minute program on NBC, and that octet was a very strange instrumentation that you heard there. Flute, clarinet, oboe, bassoon, rhythm guitar, drums, bass, and of course Barnes on the solo electric guitar. Very little improvisation in the group, but instead they opted to perform very virtuosic arrangements and managed to have a kind of avant-garde sound while still being very accessible for most listeners. That side was a side that was made for the standard radio transcription service, which provided 33 RPM records to radio stations, so those were not commercially available records. That side was called A Good Night for Murder. Well, next up, we're going to play one of my tunes, because, hey, I'm here, and I'm a big band leader, and so why shouldn't we? We're going to do a tune that my band recorded just at the beginning of this year. It's a recording of a tune that Duke Ellington wrote in 1928 called Jubilee Stomp. That was the Jubilee Stomp from the Glenn Crytzer Orchestra. That's my band, folks. Originally recorded by Duke Ellington in 1928. And that is from our new release, Ain't It Grand. It just came out a couple of months ago. If you'd like to check out more music from that album, head on over to GCO Swing. That's Glenn Crytzer Orchestra, GCOSwing.com. You can check out the whole album there. It's called Ain't It Grand. And speaking of things that are grand, we have a track coming up now from our friends at the Grand Street Stompers. This is a tune called She's a Great, Great Girl, written by Harry Woods in 1928. This tune was originally a hit for a couple of bands in the 1920s, Roger Wolf Kahn's orchestra as well as the Wabash Dance Orchestra. The Kahn recording, particularly noteworthy with a really smoking trombone solo from Jack Teagarden, as well as a wonderful duet passage for Joe Venuti and Eddie Lang, and a very surprising, strange trio for what sounds like piccolo and two flutes on that record. The Wabash Orchestra's recording also includes a very fine trombone solo from Miff Mole, and it's an arrangement by Fudd Livingston. Now, Gordon's arrangement gives us a little bit of a different take on this classic, leaving the 1920s feel behind, and instead offers us a groove that kind of brings to mind the sound of the Dixieland revival of the 1950s. Think sort of Eddie Condon, but with a very hip ending that might have come from the pen of a 1930s Don Redman or Edwin Wilcox. So here we go with Gordon Owl's Grand Street Stompers, She's a Great, Great Girl. She's a Great, Great Girl from Gordon Owl's Grand Street Stompers. In that band is Gordon Owl on trumpet, Dennis Lichtman on clarinet, Matt Musselman on the trombone, Nick Russo on the banjo, Rob Adkins on the bass, and Kevin Dorn on the drum set. You can find them at grandstreetstompers.com. By the way, folks, if you'd like to hear a recording of She's a Great, Great Girl that will make you say, what on earth did I just hear? I recommend you go out and find yourself a copy of Harry Hastings' Palm Beach Orchestra's recording from 1975. I don't even know what to make of it. It is a very strange record. And I'll be sure to include a link to that in today's show notes, along with some links to all of the other artists that were playing, the classics, the contemporary artists. If you'd like to get a copy of those show notes, please visit gcoswing.com. That's Glenn Crytzer Orchestra Swing, gcoswing.com. And get yourself subscribed to my monthly newsletter. You'll get a copy of the show notes in there, who all these artists are, where to find them online, where you can check out more of their music. You'll also get a free download of one of my original recordings when you do, so be sure to head on over to gcoswing.com. All right, well, next up we have a track from some friends of mine from down in Durham, North Carolina. This is a band called the Mint Julep Jazz Band, a tune called The Dwindling Light by the Sea. Now, this band features a very interesting lineup. It's a 4-horn front line, a vocalist, and then a 3-piece rhythm section that includes guitar, bass, and drums, strangely omits the piano. This brings to mind the sound of the 1950s Les Elgart pianoless big band, in which rhythm man Steve Jordan provided both the rhythm and the harmony with his acoustic guitar. In this band, we have Paul Rogers on trumpet, Lucian Cobb on trombone, Aaron Hill and Keenan McKenzie on reeds, Ben Lassiter on guitar, Jason Foreman on bass, Aaron Tucker on drums, and your vocalist is Laura Windley. The tune we're about to hear, The Dwindling Light by the Sea, is an original composition from one of the band's reed men, Keenan McKenzie, who is a fine musician and composer. I've had the pleasure of working with him in my big band as well. Here we go with the Mint Julep Jazz Band with The Dwindling Light by the Sea.
Charming it would be in the dwindling light by the sea. Darling, if I may, take us dancing by the bay. Picture you so close to me in the dwindling light by the sea. The band plays our favorite tune and you smile and I swoon. Breeze reach both far and wide. But nothing sounds as fine to me as the dwindling light by the sea. As the dwindling light by the sea.
All right, The Dwindling Light by the Sea. That was the Mint Julep Jazz Band, a composition by Keenan McKenzie and sung there by vocalist Laura Windley. You can check them out at mintjulepjazzband.com. And, of course, you can get more info on them in our show notes that you can get at gcoswing.com. All right, let's see. Coming up here next, we have some music from Sidney Bechet. Very, very nice. Sidney Bechet was a great clarinetist and soprano saxophonist in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And this particular side that I'd like to play for you is a really hot little number. This was recorded and released by the Hot Record Society. That was a label that popped up here in Manhattan in the late 1930s. And at first they were just reissuing 1920s hot music that had gone out of print. They were also auctioning old records and things like that. They had a record store here in Manhattan. But eventually they started releasing new sides by jazz musicians who were playing in the older hot style as opposed to the more modern swing style at that time. I believe they also had an emphasis on racially mixed groups. These small band sides that they did with Sidney Bechet were something of an experiment. The band consists of Muggsy Spanier on cornet, Bechet on soprano sax, Carmen Maestrin on guitar, who was with the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra at that time, and Wellman Breaux on bass, who was, of course, the bass player that kind of brought the bass back into the world of jazz, kind of taking over for the tuba with the Duke Ellington Orchestra. Now, an ensemble of this time, as I mentioned, was an experiment. If you look at the 1934 book Dance Band Success, which was written by a number of different very popular dance band leaders in the 1930s, the first chapter describes the foundational instruments of a jazz band as piano, drums, and some kind of lead instrument, with other instruments to be added from there, and bass and guitar or bass and banjo ranking quite far down on the list as not really essential instruments. So needless to say, this was a very unusual concept for the era to have a rhythm section that omitted drums and piano. However, European jazz, particularly the music of Belgian guitarist Django Reinhardt, was starting to really make its way around the United States in the late 30s. And Steve Smith, who started the Hot Record Society, thought it would be an interesting experiment to record Muggsy Spanier and Sidney Bechet with just a guitar and a bass backing them, emulating the sound of that gypsy jazz type of rhythm section which omitted drums and piano. So, the tune we're going to hear from the Bechet-Spanier Big Four is China Boy. That was the Bechet Spaniard Big Four doing a tune called China Boy from 1940. All right. Well, folks, if you like that kind of music, that kind of quartet vibe, I suggest that you come out on Sunday evening to hear my quartet play at the Flatiron Lounge. We do a quartet with the same instrumentation, cornet or trumpet, reed man, guitar, and bass. And I'll be there this Sunday, 6:30 to 9:30, with Gordon Howe, actually, on the trumpet, Ricky Alexander on reeds, and Rob Atkins, who we also heard from on Gordon's album, on the string bass. You can find that Flatiron Lounge between 5th and 6th Avenues here in Manhattan on 19th Street. So be sure to come in for that. There's no cover charge. All right, well, coming up next, hey, speaking of my music, my name is Glenn Crytzer. I'm filling in here for John Lombardi, guest hosting Loungin' with Lombardi here on City World Radio. And I am a big band leader and a guitarist, so we're going to play a little more of my music here. This is a tune from my newest record, and we'll feature vocalist Hannah Gill with the Glenn Crytzer Orchestra on this album. This is a tune called Just Like a Broken Record.
Just like a broken record, you've been repeating the lies that you've told me. You swore it was only a kiss, that you didn't do it on purpose. But just like a broken record, your little story's only scratching the surface. The needle drops, round and round we go. The melody makes me high, though the fidelity is low. But you pressed your luck, darling, running amok. No, you can't wax poetic and just hope that I'll forget it, or I won't keep spinning in vain with a lover whose past is so checkered. So I'm skipping out on you, dear, just like your favorite old broken record. Spinning in vain with a lover whose past is so checkered. So I'm skipping out on you, dear, just like your favorite old broken, 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 your favorite old broken record.
the tulips with me. Tiptoe from your pillow to the shadow of a willow tree and tiptoe through the tulips with me. Knee deep in flowers we'll stray, we'll keep the showers away, and if I kiss you in the garden, in the moonlight, will you pardon me? Come tiptoe through the tulips with me.
Folks, we just heard two tunes in a row there. The first of those was Just Like a Broken Record. That's actually an original tune from my own pen, performed there by the Glenn Crytzer Orchestra with vocalist Hannah Gill from our new record, Ain't It Grand. You can check that out at gcoswing.com. GC is Glenn Crytzer, gcoswing.com. The second track that we heard there was a tune that you may be familiar with from Tiny Tim. I think most people associate that tune with Tiny Tim, Tiptoe Through the Tulips. I was lucky enough to get the chance to see Tiny Tim perform when I was a small child. But long before Tiny Tim took up the tune, was a lot of T's, it was a hit for Nick Lucas in 1929. Tiptoe was tip-top on the charts for 10 weeks in 1929. Lucas, who was a sought-after performer, he was known as a troubadour of popular music, who played guitar and sang, introduced the song in the film Gold Diggers of Broadway. Lucas, of course, plays guitar there on the side with considerable virtuosity and some of that accompaniment. Lucas had a series of even guitar instructional books in the 1920s that sort of taught the rudiments of his style of guitar playing. So he was a big star that is sort of I don't know, kind of fallen a little off the radar. And the tradition, of course, of giving guitarists instructional books continued throughout the 20th century in popular music until producers with computers finally banished all of the instruments from pop music. All right. Well, by the way, folks, I want to take a second to tell you about a little project that I do called Patreon. So if you're familiar with Patreon, or if you're not familiar with Patreon, I'm going to tell you a little about it here. If you like hearing me talk about these tunes and giving you some background and telling you a little bit about jazz history, introducing you to some interesting music, I hope you will check out the website patreon.com/Glenn. That's patreon.com/Glenn. That's Glenn with two N's. And what I do on Patreon is I produce short videos, 15-20 minutes every month, and some writing and all kinds of other things that educate people about jazz, that give people a background into the history of swing music and hot jazz, that talk about how I produce music, how we record it, how I write it, all of these aspects of the kind of behind the scenes. We ask folks to subscribe to that for a couple bucks a month, and if you become a subscriber, you get access to all that content, and more importantly, you will be helping to support my big band here in New York City. All of the funds we raise on Patreon go to support the Glenn Crytzer Orchestra, which I don't know if you know this, but running a big band in the 21st century is not an inexpensive proposition, so that is how we fund it, folks. Patreon.com/Glenn, Glenn, and check it out on there. Just check out some of the free content, and if you feel like it, subscribe and help us out. All right, we're going to move on to a tune here from a pal of ours in New York City, a fine clarinet man, Mr. Dennis Lickman. Dennis has a new album coming out in August 1st, in fact, and the album is called Just Across the River. It's a retrospective of jazz in the borough of Queens from 1923 until the present. We're going to listen to a track from that album, which has not yet been released yet. The track is called Cakewalkin' Babies from Home, and it will feature Dennis on clarinet, Gordon Au on trumpet, Dalton Ridenauer on piano, J. Walter Hawks on trombone, Nathan Peck on the bass, Rob Garcia on the drums, and Jaron Blind Boy Paxton makes a guest appearance here on the vocals. Here we go with a good one, the Cakewalkin' Babies from Home.
Cakewalkin' may come, the cakewalkin' may go, but I'm gonna tell you people about a couple I know. They're a high-stepping pair, they debonair, and when it comes to strutting out, a song can't compare. Here they come, baby, look at those demonstrators going on. Oh, let them syncopators talk of the town, those teasing brown, picking them up, boy, laying them down. They're dancing fools, that's what I like to call them. They in a class all their own. Oh, the only way for them to lose is to cheat them. Oh, you made time, but you never beat them. Strut your stuff, you can't do nothing different. You can't walking, baby, from home.
That was Dennis Lickman with the Cakewalkin' Babies from Home. That was composed by Chris Smith, Henry Troy, and Clarence Williams. That tune comes to us from 1924, and that's from Dennis's new album called Just Across the River. That's a retrospective of jazz in the borough of Queens. So I'm not sure what the tie to that song in Queens is. I bet it's Clarence Williams. I bet he lived out in Queens. By the way, if you would like to check out that album and a little more of Dennis's music, they are doing a CD release show at Dizzy's at Lincoln Center on August the 1st. So be sure to check that out and go support the band, hear some of their music, doing the music of Queens. All right, well, next up we have another sort of New Yorker. She's a New Yorker. She travels a lot, though. She's back and forth between New York and Ohio a lot. Our pal is Barbara Rosine. Barbara recorded a fantastic album here in 2013 called Naughty and Nice, consisting of a number of body songs, I guess we could call them. This particular tune called Do What You Did Last Night was originally recorded in 1927 by Helen Humes, but the more well-known recording, I suppose if any recording of this is well known, is probably the Ethel Waters recording from 1928, where she performed it with James P. Johnson on piano. Certainly, The Waters is the better of the two in terms of its comedic timing. In the early 20s, Waters had been known as really as a blues singer, but when she had hits with tunes like Dinah and I'm Comin' Virginia in the mid to late 20s, her career started to take the turn toward being a performer of popular song. But here, this tune, Do What You Did Last Night, clearly falls into that body blues category. Now, Barbara's recording differs from Waters, and I think it would be hard to try and do this tune in the same way as Waters and have it not seem, sort of like a knockoff. But Barbara's lighter voice and a little bit straighter delivery, more akin to like an Annette Hanshaw or a Ruth Edding than to a Waters, really gives us a fresh take on the comedy. Craig Ventresco accompanies her on the guitar, and he really quite adeptly weaves through sounds of late 20s guitarists like Eddie Lang and Big Bill Brunzi, Tampa Red, and just about a dozen others. And Pete Martinez also appears on this track on the clarinet, adding body to the accompaniment and a very swinging clarinet solo in the middle. This is Barbara Rosine with Do What You Did Last Night.
Down in Noseyville town, people love snooping around. Everything you do gets found out, and I know what I'm talking about. I've heard old Sister Jones asking Brother Wright, Deacon, can you do what you did last night? Sure do feel improved, made my spirits move. Won't you do what we did last night? Good old Uncle Joe had an awful fright when he tried to do what he did last night. Almost broke his back. Neighbors heard it crack, trying to do what he did last night. Honey, duplicate what you did last night. Sure was up to date what you did last night. You can call on me, even have my key, if you do it like you did last night. Oh, it makes me sick and tired when you mess around. Rest your hat and coat and pull that shade on down. Anybody calls, we're out, that's all. Doing what we did last night. Hold me tight and sweet like you did last night. As I'm feeling kinda tight, you can lower the lights so we can do what we did last night. I mean, so we can dance like we did last night.
All right, that's Do What You Did Last Night from Barbara Rosine. You can find her at barbararosine.com. And by the way, you can check out all of these artists. If you get a copy of the show notes, go to gcoswing.com. That's Glenn Crytzer, GCO, Glenn Crytzer Orchestra Swing.com. And sign up for my monthly newsletter, and I will send out all the info about these artists, info about these tracks, as well as any artists I don't get to today. I'm going to be sure to include them in the notes so that you can check them out as well. I think we might not make it to everything I planned, but we'll see. All right, folks. Next up, we have a tune from Art Shaw and his new music. Now, this is, of course, Artie was originally known as Art Shaw. His management later suggested he change it to Artie to sound more like Benny, Tommy, Jimmy, Bunny, etc. all the other big name band leaders. But in 1936, we had Art Shaw and his new music, and they were trying a very novel concept, a sort of swinging chamber orchestra that included 2 trumpets, trombone, Artie on clarinet, Tony Pastor on tenor sax, a 4-piece rhythm section, and a string quartet. Now, while the band was musically a success, it was sort of a commercial failure. Artie became pretty fed up with the demand for louder and louder music for dancing, and finally disbanded the group. And with his next orchestra, which was, of course, the one that Artie made it big with, he told Buddy Morrow, apparently, that he would form the loudest damned band that anyone had ever heard, which I think he probably successfully did. Fortunately, we still have these gems from Art Shaw and his new music from 1936. This is a tune that Art recorded with Peg LaCentra on the vocal. It's called There's Frost on the Moon.
What do I care? I don't know it's there. There's spring